Dr. Carol Swain is an American conservative television commentator and former professor of political science and law at Vanderbilt University. From high school dropout and teenage mum, she went on to write many superb and sometimes controversial books, which you will find on her website, carolmswain.com. And her scholarly work has been cited by 2 associate judges of the Supreme Court of the United States. She hosts the Be the People podcast, which you must listen to, where she speaks passionately about race relations, immigration, representation, evangelical politics, and so much more. Recently, she was a candidate in the special mayoral election in Nashville, Tennessee. A former Democrat, how often are we hearing this? A former Democrat. In 2009, Carol Swain became a Republican, explaining, as a Christian, I saw stark contradictions between my biblical worldview and the Democratic Party's position on the issues I care most deeply about. She is also now a member of Black Voices for Trump's advisory board. And she tweeted only yesterday, I merely apply Judeo-Christian and constitutional principles to all Americans on a race-neutral basis. If it is wrong to discriminate against blacks and browns, it is also wrong to discriminate against whites. I'm delighted to have here on Outsiders Dr. Carol Swain. How are you?
I am doing great, thank you.
Thanks so much for coming on the show. Now, just kick off, tell us a little bit about yourself and your transition from teenage mum, dropout, through to top African-American conservative commentator.
Well, I mean, I can tell you that people came into my life and encouraged me when I had 5 degrees. The first one at a community college in business. And I never sought to become a university professor. I was steered in that direction. And most of my mentors did not look like me. And I have had role models that were white men as well as white women and a few blacks. But mostly my support came outside of my group.
Carol, you podcast and you comment a lot on politics, but obviously Black Lives Matter is the thing, the big story at the moment. What are your impressions of Black Lives Matter and how dangerous is this movement?
Well, first of all, in 2016, I believe I was one of the first commentators to point out that it was a very Marxist movement. And I believe it was July 2016, I was in a CNN debate, and I urged the viewers to go to that website because that website had not been as polished as it is today. It still shows Marxism, but then it looked as if it had been directly copied from communist writings. And I had pointed out that they were a destructive force because they had incited violence. At that time, it was the slaying of the 5 Dallas police officers that followed a Black Lives Matter rally. And what I am pointing out today is that we have to distinguish between the slogan, Black Lives Matter, which is a truth statement, in the same way that all lives matter is a truth statement. A lot of well-meaning people who want to show Black people that they care about them, these people are doing it by supporting the Black Lives Matter organization. And my position is that they're confusing the slogan with the organization. And the organization is part of a global movement to destroy life as we know it in America and probably in the rest of the Western world.
Rita.
Well, Black Lives Matter aren't only anti-capitalist group, they're also virulently anti-police. And this recently we've had the African-American Seattle police chief quitting her role because of this defund the police phenomenon that's taking hold in some of the left-wing cities. Can you take us through that and what the ramifications would be if police were defunded and had less of a presence in communities?
We already see the ramifications that we have chaos in American cities, and we've had it for more than 70 days straight. And police have been effectively neutralized in the way that they are not able to defend themselves effectively or the public at large. And so whenever the police pulls back, whenever they pull back, you get more violence. There was a recent Gallup poll of African Americans, and it showed that something like 81% of Black Americans want more police presence in their communities, not less. And they are more likely to have interactions with police than any other group because crime is greater there. And so this whole movement to defund the police is not about racial justice. It's about advancing a Marxist socialist agenda that will not improve the situation of Black Americans or their relationships with other groups. What we see is a lot of violence taking place, arson, and vandalism.
I just want to play you this clip, Carol, of a looter saying that looting is justified. Just have a listen to this.
I don't care if somebody decides to loot a Gucci or a Macy's or a Nike, because that makes sure that that person eats. That makes sure that that person has clothes. That makes sure that that person can make some kind of money because this city obviously doesn't care about them. Not only that, that's reparation.
Carol, how effective is this message amongst the Black communities, I guess particularly the disadvantaged Black communities, that looting is morally justified?
Well, what is very dangerous about the woman that you just showed, Nicole Hannah-Jones, she is the inspiration behind the 1619 project that the New York Times put forward. That program provides curriculum to more than 3,500 public schools across America. And it is again, it's tied to Marxism. It has it presents a false history, and it is about trying to force white Americans to give reparations. It's based on critical race theory, that racism is permanent, that white people have to divest themselves of their whiteness. And it's not the kind of message that we need in America or other places in the world. I'm part of a group called 1776 Unites, and we are very focused on presenting the true history of America and race relations. And in America, the story of race has been white people and Black people working together, trying to overcome their problems and their situations. And someone like me, who was a high school dropout, one of 12 children, born and raised in rural poverty, I would never have gotten those opportunities had it not been for the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, but also white men and women who came into my life, supported me, encouraged me, and as a consequence, I did things that I would have never imagined. I would never have gone to graduate school and become a professor because I didn't know anything about being a professor. And so in America, I would say that the story of race relations has been a story of people overcoming. Someone like me, born in rural poverty, I was able to achieve the American dream. There are so many stories of people that come from poverty that can achieve the American dream. I would say that Black young people have never had it better. And the reason that they're complaining is because of people like Nicole Hannah-Jones that push that Marxist ideology and they foment unrest among people.
James.
Dr. Swain, you mentioned critical race theory a moment ago, and I'm really glad that you did, because I wanted to ask you about this phenomenon, which I've also seen. Some of the BLM protest footage we saw before, mostly white people out there, and I see that among the liberal white left, they've taken up critical race theory, Robin DiAngelo's white fragility, the 1619 project, which you mentioned before, and there's this real desire, I think, on the white liberal left to describe America not as a place with a complex and sometimes painful history of race relations, but as a place that is irredeemably racist and the whole thing needs to be torn down. What do you suppose is the attraction? Is it a narcissism? Is it ultimately, something to make them feel better about themselves? But why do you think so many white progressive liberals have gone from the Martin Luther King idea of the content of your character to this new far left idea, which is actually kind of a bit like some very alt-right ideas, that it's all about the color of your skin? I'd love to get your comments on that.
Well, I mean, it goes back to cultural Marxism and some of the writings of Herbert Marcuse and Antonio Gramsci, that Herbert Marcuse what he saw was an opportunity to use the suffering of disadvantaged minority groups to advance an agenda. And that agenda is the Marxist agenda. And in the Black communities, they are noticing that the protesters, the ones that are engaged in a lot of the violence and arson, are white people. And they feel that whites have taken over their movement. And it's unfortunate that this has taken place. And the people that are complaining and seeing that the face of Black Lives Matter is now a white face, they are still confusing Black Lives Matter organization with the truth statement that Black Lives Matter. And I think the overwhelming majority of Americans would say, white or Black, Black Lives Matter, but they would say all lives matter. If you say all lives matter at a Black Lives Matter protest, you could risk your life.
Dr. Carol Swain, unbelievable. Thanks so much for coming on Outsiders today. It's been a real pleasure to chat to you. Keep up the great work, and thank you so much.
Thank you.